Yeah, just. Is this mic all right over here?
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Bank of Jamaica's first quarterly monetary policy press conference for 2023. I'd like to thank all of you, those who have taken the time to join us, both in person here at the bank and online. We have with us this morning Governor Richard Biles, Senior Deputy Governor Dr. Wayne Robinson, and Deputy Governors Robert Stennett, Natalie Haynes, and Dr. G.D. Lewis. As is the custom, Governor Biles will speak to the bank's latest monetary policy decision in the context of the bank's outlook for inflation and the overall economy against the background of the economy's performance for the last quarter. After Governor Biles has made his address, the floor will be open for the question and answer segment. Governor, over to you.
Okay. Well, good morning and welcome to our first quarterly monetary policy press conference for 2023. The calendar year has started with inflation trended in an encouraging direction. Headline inflation at January 2023, as reported by Statin, was 8.1%. This was below the rate of 9.4% for December 2022 and represented the 9th consecutive month that inflation has trended below the peak of 11.8% that we saw in April of 2022. Core inflation, which excludes food and fuel prices from the Consumer Price Index, also fell to 7.1% at January 2023 from 8.5% at December 2022. Notably, the key external drivers of headline inflation, including the prices for selected grains and fuel, have also continued to decline, and the foreign exchange rate has been stable while inflation expectations continue on a downward track. As expected, the pace of monetary tightening by the United States Federal Reserve Board, the Fed, has slowed. Following its increase of 25 basis points on the 1st of February 2023, the Fed is expected to raise interest rates in March 2023 by an additional 25 basis points and base its future decisions on the incoming data. We should bear in mind that if interest rate adjustments by the Fed exceeds that projected by the bank, it would imply the need for further adjustment in domestic monetary conditions. Notwithstanding these positive developments, the risks to Jamaica's inflation outlook are elevated. In a context where the domestic economy continues to grow, labor market shortages carry the potential for future wage adjustments that can put upward pressure on inflation. In addition, the projected level of liquidity in the financial system, if left unchecked, poses a material risk to the achievement of the inflation target, as well as to the maintenance of stability in the foreign exchange market. Of course, higher inflation could also ensue from a worsening in supply chain conditions and higher commodity prices if there are further geopolitical disruptions. On the downside, weaker than expected global growth could negatively impact domestic demand, and some projected adjustments to regulated prices may not materialize. It is against this background, and in an effort to further underpin inflation return into the target range of 4 to 6%, that the bank's Monetary Policy Committee, the MPC, announced its decision yesterday to increase by 1 percentage point the domestic and foreign currency cash reserve requirements, CRRs, applicable to deposit-taking institutions effective the 1st of April 2023. The domestic CRR will be increased to 6%, and the foreign currency CRR will move to 14%. The MPC also decided to hold the policy interest rate at 7% to maintain its posture in the money market and to continue ensuring relative stability in the foreign exchange market. In addition, the MPC is continuing to review the monetary transmission mechanism with the objective of ensuring that monetary policy achieves the desired impact on inflation control. Let me now get into some detail about the outlook for inflation and the economy. Inflation is projected to continue to decelerate in 2023. With less than 2 months remaining for 2022-23 financial year, inflation is now on track to fall in a range of 6.75% to 7.25% for the year. The forecast further envisages that annual inflation will fall within the bank's inflation target range of 4 to 6% by December 2023 and remain generally at that level over the medium term. This outlook is consistent with global consensus forecasts for a fall in commodity and shipping prices. It also assumes that inflation expectations will continue to decline, and it takes into account the bank's overall monetary policy stance. Finally, the inflation forecast also includes increases in some regulated prices, such as transportation fares and minimum wages, and assumes that there will be no new shocks. The Jamaican economy continues to show strong growth. Real GDP growth of 5.9% for the September 22 quarter was higher than the bank had anticipated, and there are signs that the economy continued to expand in the December 22 quarter and for the March 23 quarter to date. Of note, domestic economic activity is estimated to have returned to pre-COVID-19 levels in the December 22 quarter and is expected to remain above pre-COVID levels over the forecast horizon. For fiscal year 22-23, real GDP growth is therefore projected in a range of 4 to 5.5%. The bank expects that GDP growth will continue to be driven by tourism, agriculture, and a resumption of production at the Jamalco alumina plant. GDP growth for the financial year 23-24 is projected to moderate somewhat as income growth amongst Jamaica's main trading partners normalizes to pre-COVID rates. I want to turn to some other developments, in particular the foreign exchange market, which has remained relatively stable, reflecting in part actions taken by the bank in response to the higher than targeted inflation. At the 16th of February 2023, the Jamaican dollar appreciated against the US dollar on a year-over-year basis by 1.4%. This compared with a depreciation of 4% recorded over the same period of the previous year. In this context, BOJ sold approximately $732 million US dollars via the BFIXIT facility over the 12 months to the 16th of February and sold a further $583 million US dollars to selected public enterprises, including Petrojam. The Bank of Jamaica also bought approximately $2.2 billion from the market, resulting in net market purchases of nearly $940 million US. At the 16th of February 2023, Jamaica's gross international reserves remain substantial at $4.4 billion. The bank projects that the gross reserves will continue to remain adequate in the medium term. The financial system has remained stable despite the impact of fair value losses during 2023. Deposit-taking institutions have remained well capitalized, profitable, and in compliance with prudent liquidity standards. At the same time, the quality of the DTI's loan portfolio remains stable. The final area I want to make brief comments on is Jamaica's recent engagement with the International Monetary Fund. As the Minister of Finance has already indicated, on the 10th of February 2023, the Executive Board of the IMF concluded an Article 4 consultation with Jamaica and is poised to conclude a precautionary liquidity line, PLL, with Jamaica, which will allow us access to close to $1 billion US dollars in event of extreme climate-related shocks. Jamaica also expects to access resources of more than US $750 million under the Resilience and Sustainability Facility, RSF. The matter of the RSF PLL is slated for IMF Executive Board discussion on the 1st of March 2023. Ladies and gentlemen, Bank of Jamaica remains committed to achieving its primary mandate of preserving price stability. We will not waver in a resolve to bring inflation back to the target range of 4 to 6%. The bank will continue to closely monitor the global and domestic environments to look for potential risks that could threaten Jamaica's inflation target. Thank you, and I will now take questions.
Thank you, Governor. Ladies and gentlemen, as the Governor has stated, the floor is now open for your questions. Kindly use the raise your hand feature or type your questions in the chat. Please remember to identify yourselves and the organization which you represent. Please go ahead.
Pleasant morning, Governor. Since it seems like I'm the only batter from the media here today, Durant paid out today. Governor, I know the bank, BOJ, doesn't set interest rates for the commercial banking sector, but the ordinary man on the street would ask, as a result of the cash reserve ratio going up, do you expect an increase in interest rates? That is one. Secondly, I note the BOJ's concern, as well as that for others, about the interest deposit rates not moving in tandem with the BOJ's policy rate going up. But wouldn't this be counterintuitive with the cash reserve ratio going up, more sterile money being called upon the banking sector to deposit with the BOJ, that within itself would cause banks not to want to hike their deposit rates?
Yeah, we've been consistent in encouraging the banks to raise both the rates that they pay their savers as well as rates to creditors, people who they lend funds to. And this is our objective in fighting inflation, because what we want to do is to take the edge off of the exuberance in the economy. If you watch what the Fed is doing in the United States, it's a similar thing. The banks have made some progress in the direction that we have indicated to them. Deposit rates have come up, I believe, by about 59 basis points, but that is still minimal. And lending rates haven't come up at all. We are concerned that what we face in the near future is a wave of liquidity, which arises mostly from seasonal government activity, as well as our activity in the foreign exchange market. Because remember, when we buy foreign exchange, we are putting Jamaican dollars in the system. And to head that off, we are raising the CRR for both Jamaican dollars and US dollars. So it's a preemptive move to stop what we see as a potential threat. Too much liquidity in the system will put pressure on the US market, US dollar market, and we want to preempt that by taking it out. But remember, it's slated to begin the 1st of April, so there's a long period before it becomes effective. Maybe I'll ask Wayne to comment further on it.
Yeah, the cash reserve adjustments, we do expect that it will probably have a greater impact on lending rates vis-a-vis deposit rates. But as the governor indicated, and as we have been communicating, a key part of our strategy is to ensure that liquidity within the system remains within check and within the limits that we think that will allow for the exchange rate to remain pretty stable and for also inflation to come down. So this is really targeted as trying to absorb some more liquidity from the system to really augment the efforts that we have been doing since we started this tightening cycle.
A little detraction from the speech, though, Governor. This is a question I had before. It has to do with the recent regulatory regime for the financial sector. I know you have a customer-consumer division that looks at the customer complaints. And with the BOJ taking over the operational role that the FSC usually do, and the FSC now responsible for services, the question is, would your customer division be subsumed by the FSC given their new role for dealing with customer complaints?
Right. Well, I think you're referring to the minister's announcement about the Twin Peaks. So that's a policy decision that has been taken by the government, but not implemented as yet. You need to appreciate that to implement that, there's going to be some profound changes in the law. So all of this has to go through the process of being formulated into law, passed by cabinet, get to Parliament, and passed by Parliament before we can effect practically those changes that have been announced. Nonetheless, we know that it's coming, and so that we have begun to do some work in conjunction with the FSC, and we have working committees that the FSC and ourselves share, beginning to plan for both the legislative changes as well as practically what it means. Eventually, it will mean that all consumer relation affairs will go and will sit with the FSC, right? And all regulation to do, prudential regulation to do with everything in the financial sector, DTI, which means commercial banks, building societies, and so forth, as well as security dealers, insurance companies, pension funds, will come over to the Bank of Jamaica. The timeline, because of the legislative changes, is going to be maybe 18 to 24 months. Both the FSC and ourselves are impatient to get it going, because I think that in the end, what the Jamaican public will get and the financial sector will get is a better job done on market conduct and customer relations, and a better job done on prudential supervision.
But Governor, the question was specific to your customer complaints division, and it is asking, would it be subsumed by the FSC as part of the operational changes that will undergo at the BOJ?
Yes, eventually it will. That's the point I'm making, eventually. Jide, I don't know if you want to comment on our customer relations unit.
Yeah, no, I think you have outlined it well. I mean, it's very early days. The institutional framework has to be determined on and decided on, but in principle, as the governor pointed out, operationally it would make sense for all the matters to do with customer and consumer protection and market conduct to fall within the ambit of the FSC, and the prudential matters fall within the ambit of the Bank of Jamaica. So operationally, those details, I don't think we can answer a specific detail at a departmental level at this point, because it's very early in the process. But in principle, the simple answer is yes. The detail, we'll have to wait and see how those determinations are made. I don't know if that.
Thank you, gentlemen. Next, we're going to have Dashan Hendricks, whose hand has been raised. Please go ahead, Dashan.
Good morning. I have about 4 questions. I'll probably ask them to come back to the other first, because of the 3 are related to monetary policy decisions that the NPC has made. One, and just following up on Doran's question, in raising the CRR by a point come 1 April 2023, what's the thought process there in terms of how much liquidity the central bank is looking to suck out of the system? And is it just a first strike to say, maybe, I don't know, the MPC has decided that, okay, we want to increase the CRR by a certain amount, but let's go by 1 point first and watch the system to see how much, because they don't want to push up interest rates too much, so probably send the economy in a recession. And so how much you're looking to put out to the system during that 1 point increase, and what is the level of liquidity in the system right now? And if this 1 point is just plain out a portion, what is the exact portion you're forecasting you need to put out to get lending rates to where you want it to be to help to tamper down inflation? That's one.
Sorry, Dashan, you want to hold it, and let me get Robert Stennett to answer that.
Thanks, Governor. That's a good question, Dashan. The level of liquidity in the system as at yesterday is between 14 and 16 billion. Our projection, as the Governor indicated, is that this liquidity is likely to rise incrementally towards the end of February into March and April, consequent on the government's and the central bank's liquidity operations. The 1 percentage point increase in the CRR is projected to absorb on the JDollar side about $10 billion. In terms of future adjustments in the CRR, the MPC's decisions are always going to be based on the available data. The projections are subject to uncertainty. So when the increase takes effect and we assess the impact that this increase has had, there will be further considerations at the level of the MPC as to what next to do. But as it stands now, we will continue to review not only the CRR, but all the elements of our current operating framework with a view to ensure that we achieve the desired result. I just want to say that the central bank is not yet completed in its review of other mechanisms that we can use to ensure that we underpin low, stable inflation. Just a point, the US dollar cash reserve requirement was also adjusted upwards because the central bank intends to preserve the differential between the JDollar CRR and the US dollar CRR. And that adjustment is going to absorb about 44 to 45 million US dollars from the system. So I don't have a specific answer about the next steps, but as usual, we are signaling that we continue to review all the options available to us to get the desired result. Thank you.
Before you go, part of that question was, what is the desired level of interest lending rates you're looking about a range in order to achieve your desired outcome?
No, Dashan, the objective is entirely inflation driven, right? We are acting in such a way as to head off the risks associated with inflation going beyond what we so desire. So we don't have specific targets for interest rates. We know what we want to achieve. We take a step in relation to those parameters and we evaluate the impact on the system.
Dashan, if I could just tell you too that remember pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, I should say, we brought down the cash reserve ratios, both U.S. and Jamaican. I believe the Jamaican was at 9%, and the U.S. was 15%. So we gave that break during the pandemic period.
All right, the second question is on deposit rates. I know the Bank of Jamaica has been publishing the deposit rates as a means of educating the public about what is there and to maybe bring some pressure to the deposit institutions, especially commercial banks, in increasing those rates in order to help to achieve the objectives of the central bank of getting rid of some of the inflation of the system. But speaking to the banks, they're saying that it is unfair for the central bank to be doing something like that because what we have in Jamaica mostly as savings in terms of commercial bank deposits are really not savings, they're really transactional accounts, which people get paid and they use it to do their regular daily spending and thing. And so to increase interest rates on those savings which are not in the bank, no more than about a week or a week and a half or a thing, is kind of an unfair posture from the central bank to be pressuring it to bring high interest rates on that. What's your take on that view from commercial banks?
All right, I'm going to ask Dr. Lewis to help me with this one. But a large portion of the funding of the DTIs for loans comes from those very accounts that the banks are talking about are transactional. So they don't want to pay a high rate on those accounts, but they use it to fund loans that they charge 11%, 12%, 13%. So you judge which one is reasonable or not. Judy, I wonder if you have the exact amount or the approximate amount of funding of the bank's loan book that comes from savings and operating accounts.
Thank you, Governor. So in excess of 75% when you look at the loan deposit ratio, basically what that means is for every dollar of loans that's granted, 70% of that is funded, or 70 cents is funded from deposits. So it's a significant proportion. Of course, the rest of it could be funded from interbank borrowings, etc. But the point is that that core source is savings deposits that is going into facilitating its on-lending practices. And in fact, what we're observing in the system is that loan growth is pretty robust in the system. So loan growth for the year would have been around 13%, which would have been a significant increase. So banks, not only do they have deposits and use it as a base of funding their lending activities, but they're lending even more. So I think the argument that says that these are just transactional accounts, which they have, and therefore they shouldn't be interest rate sensitive, is a little dubious, because the fact is they have it available to use to facilitate their business, which they have the right to do, because their license allows them to do what is called intermediation, which is to take deposits and make loans. So I think we have to look at it on the balance and let the data speak for itself.
All right. The next question is on the labor market. A few times the MPC point to the labor market and how it presents a risk to inflation. We've asked it before, but looking ahead now, and I know you forecast, what sort of a risk is being faced if the labor market remains as strong as it is, and then we'll start to see more upward pressure on wages?
Right, so Dashon, another good question. The risk we think is material. We assess labor market conditions by doing actual surveys of businesses, asking them, well, what have their wage increases been? What sort of wage increases do they plan to give? And we also talk to the business sector to get their sense in a more qualitative manner as to what's happening in the labor market. And we know that there are pockets, there are certain segments in the productive sector that are facing labor market constraints. And when we try to glean what's the sort of rate of increases, it varies, but it is significant. Some of our surveys suggest annual increases of 13% upwards. So we see that as a material risk, particularly if the economy continues to recover at the pace that it is currently doing.
Okay, very last question of the floor, and this goes back to the regulation. I mean, the minister has placed 4 central bankers on the FSC board and a central bankman as the head of the FSC now. And a securities dealer said to me that the Bank of Jamaica wanted to over our regulation long term was the SSL matter as a means to just bulldoze them way in and get it over with. But looking back at the issue, SSL is a very small entity in terms of the securities dealers sector. And I don't know if you've been having meetings, I suspect you've been having meetings both at board level and speaking to Mr. Burrell and what they are and the temporal manager, what they are seeing from the SSL. But it's still a small entity, and the FSC was giving so much leeway. And I'm thinking to myself, are you seeing anywhere whereby if they give such a small entity so much leeway that they are seeing, would they be not giving even more leeway to the bigger ones? And also to other sectors related to pensions and insurance sectors? I mean, what are you seeing so far as to why the minister would use just an issue from a small entity, one of the small securities dealers in the country, and use it to push through a full reform of the entire financial landscape? I'm wondering if there's much more than we're seeing with the SSL start, and from your position as now chairman and your other deputy governors in that progress.
So Dashan, the decision to create the Twin Peaks and to give us, the Bank of Jamaica, control over the entire prudential regulation of the financial sector is the minister's decision. It's not ours. We didn't do a takeover bid. The minister, for his reasons, asked if we are prepared to do it, and we said, yes, we are up to the challenge, and so we accepted that request. It's early days. Mr. Burrell, who is in there, has been doing a good job of becoming familiar with the portfolio. We've had meetings with the sector, security dealers in particular. So it's a time where we are becoming familiar with what exists. I can't comment on what, if anything else, looks like a SSL in the system. I don't think so. But as we work our way through, we will always be transparent and come to the media and the public with whatever we may find.
Good morning, Governor. Apologies for lateness, but this will lead into my question. Inflation is trending down. There are good inflows from tourism. Things look pretty good, but are you concerned about the headwinds of energy? We see oil prices globally going up. We're expected to have an oil bill of around 2.5 billion. What are you seeing there, and the impact of that? And the war in Ukraine is progressing as well.
Well, we're hopeful about oil prices. It has not yet breached what we have in our forecast for the cost of oil. So fingers are crossed. That's about the best you can do as a small nation in this big world where we don't produce any energy ourselves. The geopolitical situation is fluid. I grant you that, and nobody can know what to expect down in the future. But again, we are hopeful, and all our forecasts are based on that situation, if not being resolved, remaining no more disruptive than it currently is. So all our bets are off if that situation explodes, or if oil, heads north of $100 a barrel and so forth.
Just a follow-up question, Governor. When we were last there, you talked about the impact of fair value losses seems to have manifested itself. How long do you see this kind of going on for? Do you see this over the next 2 quarters? What's your assessment?
Well, because the Fed has moved pretty aggressively in the last year with their rates, what that has done is made bond prices fall. And in so doing, it's eroded a lot of equity of financial institutions. To the extent that the market has digested what the Fed has done as well as what they say they will do, it means that we are probably at the bottom of the fair value losses. But of course, the Fed always leaves the door open to say it is looking at incoming data, and if that data is not to their satisfaction, they reserve the right to move rates up. So I don't think the market has taken that into account. So there is a risk that the Fed continues to raise rates beyond March, and that would be a problem perhaps for the bond market. But our financial institutions have weathered the worst. Because remember, the Fed rate was nearly 0, and they have gone to nearly 4 3/4. So the financial institutions have weathered that, and they have had enough capital and buffer capital to get them through. So, they have done a good job in that respect.
Just a last question here from me for a little while. Governor, when you look across to our neighbors in Trinidad, they haven't made a move to increase their rates. I was speaking to someone recently, and he said, well, look, we fear capital flight, that's why. Can you comment on that, or particularly in Trinidad?
Yeah, I don't think sufficiently capable to comment or to comment a lot on the Trinidad situation. What I would say generally for small open economies, particularly for economies that has an open capital account, we have to keep an eye on that differential, on the rate that you can get on an alternative foreign currency investments versus a local investment, and particularly in a context where you want to ensure that your exchange rate remains pretty stable, or worse, if you have a fixed exchange rate or a tightly managed exchange rate, as in the case of Trinidad. In environments like this where international financial conditions are tightening, you have to, as a small open economy, keep a very close eye on that and ensure that you have a comfortable differential.
It would be remiss of me not to comment, but what's your take on the recent IMF and Financial Times assessment of the Jamaican economy? No doubt you saw the report.
Well, we agree with it.
Thank you, gentlemen. I have a question in the chat, from Neville Graham. With the increase in the CRR expected to push up lending rates and tighten liquidity, what is the likely impact on commercial lending?
Okay. So it may cause lending rates to rise, and I think each bank will judge that for themselves. But what we are most interested in is taking the liquidity out of the system, because that could have an impact negatively on the exchange rate. I think each bank will make a decision as to whether that is going to impact their cost of funds so significantly that they will raise lending rates. Will they raise it for new credit? Will they raise it for existing credit? All those are decisions that individual banks will make for themselves.
Thank you, Governor. He has a follow-up question. How long is BOJ prepared to continue with the increase in the CRR?
We're going to watch it and see what is the impact. Is liquidity down to the levels that we consider safe enough? If not, do we have to move it again? So, like everything, we are going to base it on the facts and the data that we see every time the MPC sits and evaluates what decision to make.
Thank you, Governor. We have a question from Calvin Brown. Mr. Brown, would you like to ask the question, or do you prefer me to read it? I'll read it. BOJ is concerned about banks not increasing interest rates sufficiently. How far do you project that the CRR increase will force banks to raise rates?
I think that's pretty much the same question as before. Each individual bank is going to have to determine what is the impact of putting aside more dollars in the Bank of Jamaica at zero interest rate in order does that mean they have to raise their lending rates? For some banks, it may not be terribly significant and they can continue. For others, it may just mean marginal or new credits get notched up. And for some, it may mean all credits notch up. It depends on the particular liquidity of each individual institution.
Yeah. But I think it's important to just keep in mind why we're actually doing this. We're not trying to raise interest rates because we want high interest rates. We're trying to manage inflation. And our projection is that inflation, as the governor indicated, will fall to the 4 to 6% target by the end of this fiscal year. There are risks around that on the upside, and so therefore we have to take all the actions necessary to ensure that those risks are mitigated and to ensure that inflation comes back down. We all know the impact that inflation has on the poor and on the productive sector and on the society as a whole. And the country can't grow on a sustained basis in a high inflation environment. So that is why we need to try and take that inflation out. And that is why we have adopted or we continue to adopt this stance that we have.
And can I say the transmission system is not totally broken. It actually works very efficiently with the money market, where interest rates have risen considerably. So if you are a customer of a security dealer, or if you are buying bonds or even government paper, treasury bills, if you are buying CDs, and if you even have a time deposit with the commercial banks, you will find that those rates have risen. So when you look at total funding throughout the financial sector, you will see that it has responded quite strongly to our policy rates. What has not responded is the savings account rate and any operating accounts in the commercial banks. Those two have been very sticky. And all I say is that we have hundreds of thousands of small savers in the commercial banks. It is incredible to me that the banks have seen us move our rate from 0.5 to 7, and all they have given is a little bit more than 0.5 to their savers. I just think that is not reasonable, and the banks need to justify that to their customers.
Thank you for the fulsome responses, gentlemen. Dashan, I see your hand is up. Is it still up?
No, I just wanted to play devil's advocate before we leave.
Okay.
Governor, one of the things the securities dealers have pointed out is that the central bank, being very conservative, may stifle their own innovation in terms of creating new products for their clients. Is that a concern? Is that concern justifiable from the securities dealers? And the second question, and very last from me, is whenever I speak to people in the financial sector about policy decisions, some of the times they shy away from responding, saying, anytime we talk and we appear in the media, the Bank of Jamaica running one way, and they suddenly we're getting a call or here or there, so they shy away from speaking to us some of the times. Is the Bank of Jamaica trying some way to my words, probably not the best word, muzzle the securities, not securities, but players in the financial sector from speaking out against policies which they may not be in agreement with?
Well, Dasha, the last part of that question takes me totally by surprise. You know, I don't know what you're referring to, and we have no authority over security dealers and anything that they want to say. Absolutely not. That I think, you know, going.
Not securities dealers, but players in the financial sector, according to that part.
I still don't know what you're referring to. I mean, unless you get specific, I really can't respond to that. In respect of us being more conservative, well, what can I say? We are a central bank. We do have standards. We do consider managing risk to be vitally important. And I would think that anyone in the financial sector should agree with that. Beyond that, there's nothing special about Bank of Jamaica and our regulation. We just want institutions to manage risk properly and nothing more. If you want to make money, we ourselves have been quite innovative. And indeed, the security dealers made that point at the recent stock exchange conference. Our central bank digital currency, that's not innovative. We're one of the few in the world who have initiated that. We have a sandbox with all kinds of innovative, and we have opened the door for everyone with a technological innovation in the financial sector, in the payments industry, to come in and to demonstrate to us what they have in mind. And I'm going to ask Mrs. Natalie Haynes to comment on that in a minute. So I think, Dashan, that labeling institutions, is not the right way. Let's work together and let us see what really our regulation is trying to achieve, and for us to appreciate more fully what it is that the dealers or other members of those institutions want to achieve. We're open to doing business, and we want growth. We want innovation. We want progress. We want modernity. There's nothing in our policy that prevents that. And there's nothing in what we have done so far that makes you feel that we don't want progress. Mrs. Haynes, you want to speak about the sandbox and everything you're doing over there?
Sure, Governor. Thank you, Governor. Good morning. For Sandbox, that was implemented in March 2020, and the guidelines for operations are on our website. But just to say eligibility for persons entering the Sandbox, these are entities that are regulated either by BOJ, well, and FSC, that was it at the time, that have a payment product that does not fall under their current legislation. For example, a Cambio or remittance company who want to test a payment product can come into the Sandbox because under Bank of Jamaica Act, the offering of Cambio remittance services does not involve payment products. So they come in and test. Some DTIs who can offer payment products through the BSA, they also come into the Sandbox just to see how that product will work. And so far, we have had significant entrants, as I said, Cambio remittances, credit unions. For fintech companies that are not regulated, we ask that they partner with a DTI in coming to the Sandbox so as to mitigate any AML CFT risk. Because that's always a risk in terms of entities that we authorize to operate. And of course, from the Sandbox, when you're testing, you're actually testing with consumers. So we have to be very mindful of the AML safety risks. Thank you.
Governor, I'm telling. Oh, sorry, Dashan. My apologies, mate. Sorry, you go ahead. No, sorry, Durant. Sorry, Durant. Go ahead.
Okay,
mate. Go
Governor.
ahead.
The BOJ has not had a repo auction, if memory serves me, from October last year, out of concerns that the interest rate target set has been breached. Given the posture of the BOJ to be aggressive in terms of mopping up excess liquidity, the CRR going up. Based on these factors, do you foresee the desire of having any repo auction this year or going into next year?
All right. What I think you're referring to, Durant, is the 2-week lending facility that we have. Now, of course, as you'll appreciate, as we've been saying, our policy stance, the policy stance taken by the MPC, is to contain and constrain Jamaica dollar liquidity. So therefore, we will not. So that is why we have temporarily pulled that facility. I should point out, though, that institutions, the banks in particular, do access loans from us on an overnight basis. So if they do need some liquidity, there's an overnight facility. Of course, it will reflect the interest rates that is reflected in our policy rate. Going forward, as we keep stressing, we have to assess based on the data and based on the incoming data and how the outlook for inflation is changing and how the outlook for financial conditions is changing, the MPC would adjust or modify its policy.
But based on what's happening, you have not had an auction.
Right.
You have not had a desire to have an auction since October. And I'm saying, given the aggressive stance of mopping up excess liquidity, do you foresee that there will be no need for an auction this year or going into next year?
Possibly not, but as I say, our stance is data dependent and it's based on how things are evolving and how the outlook is changing.
Governor, you talked about the global environment, and it was, I don't know if you listened to Putin this morning. The language was very bellicose. He talked about really stamping his authority in the Donbass. When we think about the war in Ukraine, we thought it would last initially 6 weeks, 6 months. Now it's going well beyond the year. And what he said today, it looks like it's going to be protracted. Can you talk a little about how you see that, the impact on that, and what that means?
Well, it can be good, but so long as it doesn't go beyond the current impact, then we have that programmed in. So oil at a certain price, grains coming down, all of that is programmed into our forecast. And so long as that geopolitical situation doesn't explode beyond where it is now, I would say that we have those assumptions covered. But we don't know what he has in mind, and we have to wait and see. We certainly hope that it is nothing that is going to affect us negatively.
Governor, you hear me? Given the move to do greater supervision of the security sector, what has the bank put in place in terms of staffing, in terms of systems to take on this additional task?
As I was saying earlier, what we have is a policy decision, but that policy decision has to be followed up with changes in the legislation, profound changes. Both the Bank of Jamaica Act and the Financial Services Act have to be fundamentally restructured before we can practically start to implement that Twin Peak supervision. What we are doing now, however, is working jointly with the FSC in a number of working groups to look at the various issues and implications and to plan out a timeline and set target dates for achievement of certain goals so that we can land this policy decision practically in the 18 to 24 months that the minister indicated.
Thank you, Mr. Graham, for that question. Thank you for the response, Governor. We have another question from Calvin Brown. There is an ongoing drought. Are you expecting higher agricultural food prices to result and threaten inflation?
Thanks for that question. Like the rest of Jamaica, we are aware that sections of the island have been experiencing meteorological drought, in particularly the southern to the eastern section of the island appears to be having protracted drought, and this is data that is available to us up to November from the Met Service. We are also aware, however, that the main agricultural areas, while they are experiencing drought conditions, these conditions are not necessarily different from the 30-year average that we have been seeing, and therefore the conditions facing the farming communities in those areas are consistent with what they have been used to. With that said, however, we try to weatherproof our projections for agricultural prices as best as we can. And just to give you an example of what we mean, the average monthly increase in agricultural prices for the past 5 years between February and December has been about 1.5%. When you take into account the volatility in agricultural prices, the average monthly change has been in that ballpark. Our projections, however, try to anticipate the worst, consistent on the current situation and the natural progression of global warming. So we have built in a little higher price increases in the forecast to which the governor referred. Our hope is that there are no major shocks like hurricanes and so on. We don't account for that. And in relation to other food types like fish, we don't account for the impact of global warming and on the location of fishing grounds and so on. But as far as possible, the projections that we are seeing here that the governor outlines reflect a certain amount of conservatism on the part of the bank's projections. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Stennett. I think you have answered the follow-up question. How much impact will the drought have? All right. Okay, go ahead, Al.
Governor, we saw remittances dip and then it's come up again. It's looked pretty encouraging. Do you see this? Do you see remittance flows increasing, say, over the next 2 quarters or so? What are you seeing, or what are you factoring in here?
Natalie, you are Miss Remittance.
Yes. Remittance flows have been, whilst they are lower than during the height of the pandemic, we are still seeing higher flows than pre-pandemic. So they have dropped off since 2020, yeah, but still higher than pre-pandemic flows. So we expect that to continue. Yeah.
Thank you, Mrs. Haynes. Any further questions? Please go ahead.
Governor, the Financial Action Task Force had placed retained Jamaica on their grey list. Jamaica got a period up until February to complete its report. Can you share with us the status of what's happening there?
If Natalie is Miss Remittance, Jide is Mr. Fatef.
All right. Well, it's a little early. I think we'll really know towards the end of the month. I know representations are being made as we speak, and the facts will essentially, Jamaica has to demonstrate that we have made significant progress in relation to the outstanding action items. I think at the last meeting we had demonstrated that we had completed or largely completed 6 of the 13. The update that is being presented is to show how much more of those action items we have completed, and for FATF to determine whether or not that is a demonstration that we have made significant improvement. But in terms of getting their response, which is the important thing, we'd have to wait until the end of this month, the end of February, before we can, and that will be a public disclosure, so it will be available for all to see exactly what their pronouncements. Thereafter, the critical thing for us will be to move very swiftly to complete all 13 action items, and then to move to a position where FATF would indicate their willingness to send an assessor to do their own evaluation of the completion of those particular action items. So that's a step. It's end February to hear the pronouncement from FATF, a determination. If it is favorable, then a determination as to the ability of the country to complete all 13, largely or significantly, and then an assessor.
Thanks, Dr. Lewis. Are there any further questions? Okay, given that there are no further questions,
Melanie,
go ahead, Governor.
just to say, I think that this meeting is looking perhaps more optimistic, more of an optimistic future than others. The inflation tendencies are heading down. Growth is good. So I think that we are at an important and positive time. And this particular date should mark an important, perhaps hopefully, turning point where we can decisively head back into that inflation corridor. We still have risks that are outside of our control, the geopolitical, as you mentioned, and the impact on commodity prices. But those that are within our control, we're really determined to manage that. The increase in the CRR is precisely an effort to do that. So let's see how that works out, and let's see what the incoming data looks like to measure whether we are indeed being successful. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. And on that optimistic note, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us. Do have a good day and stay safe.